Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us once again. Umdungo uyengayo umalinge undima unkumbuzo uthando lwethu kadlanga. Your host on Point de Politique welcomes you this particular day. This is a pre-recorded session and a live programming which is scheduled for this afternoon. It is going to be speaking about the politics in and of the African continent. You must remember that over the past week I had mentioned that we are going to be talking extensively about the politics of the African continent and also Pan-Africanism, trying to explain further. If you are new into this program, just ensure that this Point de Politique is a platform that is hell-bent on teaching those that want to know politics, but also at the same time, it does not at any particular time states that the host nor the researchers of this program are the know-it-all of the particular program. So we welcome you. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you are following us, please ensure that you continue to subscribe to our Point de Politique YouTube page and subscribe. Here is the information. The more the followers, the merrier the program is to be. We are also available on Twitter at Point de Politique. Make sure that you also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and equally on one of the famous platforms, which is called TikTok. So if you are willing to make any contribution to this particular conversation, you can do that. Make a communication with us and ensure that you are following every other discussion that we are having. So as I had said, in the previous week, we were giving a clarification about Pan-Africanism, the different elements and the different understandings of people as they tend to understand Pan-Africanism. And also we made some critiques around the issue of Urutendo, one of the activists of Zimbabwe, whom he was making reference to Julius Malema, and about Julius Malema is not a Pan-Africanist. So today we are joined by one of the seasoned activists, comrades and cadres in the African continent, one of the great Pan-Africanists and organizers in the African continent. His name is Imani na Umoja. He is in Guinea Bissau, and he's a known campaigner. For those who have been following politics of the continent, they would probably know him. Imani, my comrade, how are you?
I'm very good, my brother and comrade. And how are you doing? And how are our comrades who are looking at us and following us?
Yeah, thank you. We are doing good. And as Point de Politique, we are appreciative of your effort to being part of this conversation, and we thank you very much for that. Imani, just tell us a little bit about who is Imani and what does Imani do in his political life?
Imani is a simple African who's in love with his people, who is in love with humanity, and who decided to follow the great servants of our people, to be a humble servant of our people, to do any and everything necessary to make sure that we transform the society from the society that we were born in. We were born into a society where, unfortunately, human beings like you and I are still exploited, are living in misery in a continent that is super rich, in a world that is super rich as well. So Imani decided to learn as much as he can to transmit to those who want to know. So Imani came to realize that the most important thing is to give an example, and that there must be an organization, a permanent organization, and that permanent organization must have a mechanism to make sure that we transmit our culture, the fruits of our people's history, the history of resistance. So Imani became an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the party that was conceived by Kwame Nkrumah along with Amilcar Cabral, Sekou Touré, and continued by other great children of Africa like Mwene Koyate, Kwame Touré, and others. And Imani also serves on the Central Committee of the PAIGC and its National Secretariat. So in short, Imani is a simple servant of our people.
Yeah, thank you very much, Imani, for that particular introduction, and we appreciate to have you. And for how long have you been organizing under the banner of Pan-Africanism?
All of my adult life. Because as a young child, you know, we heard a number of things that we didn't properly understand, but we agree with it. We just didn't properly understand it. We've heard from our elders about people who came before us, like Marcus Garvey, Amy Jack Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and we were a small child when Kwame Nkrumah was in power, and the PAIGC was carrying out the African Party of Guinea and Cape Verde PAIGC, carrying out its glorious armed struggle in coordination with the glorious armed struggles of Mozambique, Angola, and we had the confident, faithful representatives of our people in the People's Democratic Republic of Guinea, the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, and Osagyefo was in power in Ghana. So we were saying these things and saying we want to be like them, but we still didn't properly understand it. So as time went on, we continued to grow and try to quest our thirst for knowledge by getting as much information as we could. So we became involved in any types of attempts against humanity, any types of gestures of exploitation of our people. And so as we started putting the things together, as time come to go, we realized that those comrades that sat down with their intelligence and came to the conclusion that we must have a scientific objective as well as a strategy to reach that objective. And we studied those. We studied the different proposals that existed in the world, that those we could get access to. And we came to the conclusion that those who said that we must have one Africa, totally free, with socialism, had the correct approach. And then when they said that the strategy must be the organization of the masses of our people, not just some of our people, the mass of our people, we said this makes perfect scientific sense. So that's when we came to the conclusion around the time of later high school, early college, this is the correct path to take. And so the more that we got involved, the more we learned, more conscious we became, and then tried to humbly transmit what we learned. So we learned from that as well. And then we became almost like a prisoner of our consciousness, understanding that once you begin to get example, you have to be very careful 24 hours a day that you don't cause any confusion about the example that you are manifesting. And so we're challenged by self-consultation to always be honest, to be humble, to always project our morals, be guided by our morals into our ethical plane. So in short, all of our adult life, we've been active revolutionary Pan-Africanists.
Now that's a beautiful thing. It shows that the type of guest that we are having this evening is a known campaigner. He knows what he's talking about. And you are in Guinea-Bissau, and yes. You are speaking about the legacy of the PAIGC. Maybe let us start there. Just help our viewers in an understanding of the PAIGC and also the founding mothers and the founding fathers and the struggles which they got involved in Guinea-Bissau, and how that struggle has also affected the struggle of the Africans in the continent and also in the diaspora, but with specific focus to the continent.
Okay, but I think it's one and the same. African is diaspora. It's the mother, the father, the children, the nieces and the nephews, the extended family. This is the homeland of Amilcar Cabral. Guinea-Bissau, as you said, is a part of Africa, but each part of Africa has similarities, but it has its specificity. It has its specific differences. For example, if you look at the resistance of the people of Guinea-Bissau, before any exploitators set their foot on this part of Africa, our people were resisting against the negative aspects of nature, floods, thunderstorms. Sometimes every once in a while, maybe you have a plague of locusts, the natural things. And also the struggle between men and women and men and women. Guinea-Bissau has, for the most part, was dominated by what we call horizontal structures. You didn't have different rulers sitting on top of different rulers historically in Guinea-Bissau. And historically in Guinea-Bissau, it was a matriarchal society. That is to say, it was the women who had the power. They didn't exploit men with that power, but it was, and it still exists to some extent, particularly in the islands.
Wow.
I think Guinea-Bissau is the only country in Africa that has 88 islands right off of its coast. You have some like Cape Verde has about 8 different islands, but that's Cape Verde, just islands. San Tome Principe, you have San Tome, you have the island, one island, Madagascar's island. But Guinea-Bissau, you have the continental boundaries, and you have the 88 islands, of which about 44 inhabited by men and women. So these men and women who were used to living in a matriarchal society without private ownership of the means of production, they were all the time seeking harmony. But little by little, particularly when people discovered that if you plant a seed, it can grow a plant similar to the plant that the seed came from, then people start to have a quest to have their own land. And this is when the means of production began to transform from a collective means of production, which we call communalism. Some people call it primitive communism. We started little by little in some parts going into feudalism. And then in some parts, little by little, we had invasions of European slave capturers. We resisted against them. And then in some of these same countries to send their terrorists to capture our people into slavery came back down to try to capture our land. They established their posts in the Cape Verde Islands, which, by the way, geographically, Cape Verde is closer to Dakar, Senegal, than it is to Guinea-Bissau. Okay. So our people resisted, but unfortunately, we didn't have the superior armed fire that our enemies had, particularly the British, the Portuguese, and even the Germans tried to pass through here for a while. So eventually, the resistance, which was somewhat disorganized or disunified, but you had some people in that particular area, in the northern part of the country, resistance, others in the southern part of the country, etc., but not together, not organized at that time. But with the resistance that was not that unified, it took the Portuguese about 400 something years before they were finally able to get what they called effective occupation.
Okay.
And that was this past century, the 20th century, like around 1917, the end of the first imperialist war, could they say to the Portuguese in Portugal that they had Guinea-Bissau effectively occupied. But even still, then our people were resisting. And this resistance made a qualitative leap and quantitative in the late 1940s, early 1950s, when different movements began to be organized. And these movements came together in 1956 and organized a party. And from the very beginning, this party was a Pan-Africanist party, still is a Pan-Africanist Revolutionary Party. It was, at that time, it was just called the PAI, the Partido Africano de Independencia, the African Party of Independence. Okay. And this party decided it needed to go inside the country. The party was founded in the city of Bissau, the capital, but they knew that it had to go inside the country into the villages where the peasantry lived, because the overwhelming majority of our people are peasantry. And so fortunately, this was 1956, the 19th of September. Fortunately, the following year, on the 6th of March, 1957, the Convention People's Party, led by Sachi Kwame Nkrumah, proclaimed independence of Ghana. And the year after that, 1958, it decided to organize an all-African People's Conference, where it has 62 different parties, liberation movements, and workers' unions. Amilcar Cabral, representing the PAI, attended this conference, made a lot of contact with Africanists. same year, 1958, Guinea-Conakry went from French colonialism to proclaiming the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, 1958, on the 2nd of October. After that very historical referendum that was took place in all of the French colonies, where they said no to becoming a part of the French Francophonie, which means no to neocolonialism and yes to independence. And so now this was the premortal external condition that allowed the PAIGC, when it decided in 1959, after a terrorist massacre of our people on the 3rd of August, in what is called PGG to the port, it decided to go to armed struggle. 1959, it decided. But it didn't begin its armed struggle until 1963, because Amilcar Cabral is an engineer. You know, engineers know how to take their time. He's an agronomist engineer.
Yeah.
He realized that if you want to jump over a wall, and that wall is like maybe 40 or 50 meters from where you are, don't jump from here. Go closer to the wall and then jump over. In other words, first, they set up a base in Conakry, the capital of the People's Democratic Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, and worked with the PDG, the Democratic Party of Guinea, of the Democratic African Revolution, PDG RDA, led by Ahmed Sékou Touré, great Pan-Africanist. They made sure that they explained the reality of Guinea-Bissau to the authorities of this party state of the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, so that the party state would not be fooled by all these other little small formations. Sometimes a mother and father and a child decide to organize a quote unquote liberation movement, try to get funds, you know, since they're living there outside of Guinea-Bissau. So once the authorities realized that this PAIGC is the serious party, this is the party we must work with, then they gave them a lot of contacts so that they could now hook up with the revolutionaries were there from other parts of the world. For example, you have the People's Republic of China, PRC,
Yeah.
which had its embassy there. You had the Soviet Union, USSR had its embassy there. Cuba had its embassy there. The People's Democratic Republic of Korea, what people call North Korea. And at the same time now, the People's Glorious Armed Struggle in Algeria was seriously intensified. So they had their representation there. Vietnam was seriously intensely involved in this armed struggle. They had their representation. In short, the PAIGC now had access to different revolutionary formations in the world. And the party state of the PDG, RDA, of the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, gave the PAIGC some of everything. They gave them political support, material support, and moral support. They allowed them to have passports from Guinea-Conakry. They allowed them to have some buildings in Conakry where they put the party headquarters. They put what they call a pilot school, which is a model school that the PIDC was organizing, so that once we became independent, this would be the school that we would install throughout the country of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde to create that new man and that new woman. And they allowed the PIDC to have arms training inside of Guinea-Conakry. They gave them access to all of the army barracks throughout the country of Guinea-Conakry. From there now, the PIDC was able to send some of its youth, who they'd already been doing some ideological training as well as teaching them French, teaching a little bit of history, geography. They were able to send youth to go to the PRC, the People's Republic of China, where they were able to undergo political military training in 1960. So when they came back after about 7 months, they went inside the country to put into practice what they had learned. And fortunately, Amilcar Cabral had already been throughout the country. Since he's an agronomy engineer, he was able to carry out a survey, an agronomist survey, to find out what type of crops each ethnic group grew, how did they live. But he used that opportunity to really study our people. You know, how are people in different parts of the country? How are what is the different ethnic groups approach to the struggle for independence? So when these youth came back from China, trained in political military, Cabral could point his finger and say, okay, when you go to Cabo Shanki and look for such and such person, And when you go to Boyd, look for such and such person, and be careful about such and such person. That person is a collaborator with the Portuguese colonialists. So these youth were able to mingle in with the people. For an example, you have maybe a youth that was born inside Bissau from an ethnic group called Pepel. But that youth now went to the a part of the country where it was dominated by Balantas, another ethnic group. And that youth learned more Balanta than that youth knew Pepel, the language and the customs. So from this marriage between the organizers and the mass of our people, particularly in the villages, the conditions were proper 2 years later, in 1963, to actually initiate the People's Glorious Armed Struggle, where it was actually the people who were involved, not just a few people, not a few of interest. You already had the organizational structures in place. You had political education going on. You had committees organized. Each of the village, they would put a committee of 5 people to start off with. And then of those 5 people, at least 2, mandatorily, at least 2 would have to be women, have to be sisters, to make sure that we take in consideration not just the struggle of the level of the nation state, not just the level of the struggle against colonialism, against racism, against capitalism, but also the struggle against patriarchy. So these things took place at the same time now, a year later, 64, since the party, the People's Party, the PAIGC, was able to liberate 1/3 of the territory. They decided to hold a Congress inside of Guinea-Bissau, even though the Portuguese were fighting close by. And this Congress made some very significant decisions. It decided, first of all, to discipline those who had backwards ideas, those who thought that because they had guns, that they could kick out the Portuguese in that part of the country, but then they could sit in the power with the same type of exploitation the Portuguese did. So they had to be disciplined. Some had to be eliminated physically. And it also, this Congress, they decided to organize schools, not just the party school, but actually in the liberated zones to put schools there.
Okay.
Some people were really, pessimistic. How can you organize schools with children while you're fighting a war? What about when the bombs begin to fly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But of course, the response of those who were clearing the PIDC was, it's worthless, it's not worthwhile to liberate a zone if you're not going to replace that zone with things for the people. One of our biggest challenges is that Portuguese colonialism created a condition where 99% of our people were illiterate. They didn't even know how to write their names. So now we have to put schools there so that these people can learn how to read and write. And then put people stores there. You can trade your crops for other things. For example, you might grow peanuts, or you might grow yammy, or you might grow rice. You go exchange it for a fabric like this that somebody else is producing. And then they decide to organize the people's judicial structures, where each village will have a judicial committee made up of the people of the village, so that when there any types of injustices occurred or alleged injustice, they can go to this committee immediately. And if the decision was not favorable to one of the parties, they can appeal it to a sectional judicial structure, where you bring together a group of villages. If that wasn't satisfactory, somebody wanted to appeal, they could go to the regional appeals, which is made up of the people. Of course, now you have a few who had studied law, who have to, share some of their experiences. They also decided to organize militias to arm the people in these areas so they could defend these areas against the Portuguese and their collaborators. So you had basically, in a nutshell, you had structures of a state. They organized health centers, thanks to the collaboration with our revolutionary comrades, first of all, of Cuba, but of course also China. We organized people's clinics. So for the first time in the history of some of these people, they had access to a doctor, to a health worker. You also had our international, or what we call international political department. So we had everything really that a state has: the educational system, the health system, the judicial system. The only thing that was lacking now was to have a legislative branch. So after we liberated 2/3 of the territory and implanted 200 and something schools. I don't know how many health centers, judicial committees. The party decided now we're going to do a voter registration campaign. First, we did a census to find out how many people do we actually have living in these liberated zones, as well as in some of the zones controlled by the Portuguese. Because at this time, the only zones really controlled by the Portuguese were the urban centers.
Okay.
So even in the urban centers, we had our party organizers there. So they were able to carry out a clandestine, a secret voter registration, a census and voter registration drive, which lasted more than a year, from 1971 to 1972. So by November 1972, we already hit all the conditions to convene the first session of the People's National Assembly, our legislative branch. And it was at this point, and the first historical mission of this National People's Assembly would be to proclaim the establishment of the state, the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Unfortunately, on the eve of this, Cabral was assassinated by the Portuguese colonialists and some of their traitor collaborators.
Okay.
But even though the PAIGC said that we're gonna mourn Cabral by attacking the Portuguese even harder than we did when Cabral was alive, and we're going to make sure that these deputies who were elected to this National People's Assembly, that they carry out the historical mission that Cabral gave to us to convene the first session and proclaim the existence of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. One of the operations that was carried out on African Liberation Day, the 25th of May, 1973. 5 months after the assassination of Cabral. They call it the Amilcar Cabral operation, where they were able to take one of the most fortified forts in Guinea-Bissau. The Portuguese considered to be impenetrable. You cannot penetrate it. So they did that. Meantime, some of the Portuguese soldiers had been captured by the PAIGC, also underwent political education. Cabral explained to the militants and the responsibles very well. These Portuguese soldiers, they have guns in their head, so we think they're enemies. They're really not our enemies. They are ignorant. Inside of Portugal, they are super poor. They're exploited by fascism in Portugal. So when you capture them, don't torture them. Give them fresh water to drink, give them food to eat, put them somewhere fresh, and talk to them. Explain to them why we're doing our struggle. And then if they want to, we can facilitate them going to Algeria. But because by this time now, Algeria had become independent, thanks to that glorious armed struggle led by the FLN, the Liberation Front of Algeria. And so since the PAIGC had very close relationships with them, they were able to organize a base for this movement of free officers of the Portuguese army. And so there too, they underwent political education, and I don't know if I mentioned it, the first meeting of this underground free officers movement took place inside Bissau, underground, clandestinely. From there now, they were able to get in contact with their comrades of the Portuguese army in Mozambique, Angola, and they were really tired. They'd been defeated. They didn't really know why they were fighting. You know, they were told, oh, yeah, you know, these are terrorists. They have tails behind it. They live in the bush. They just attack people. They drink blood, blah, 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 blah. But now when they came into contact with people like you and I, it's how these people were just organized because of love and dignity. As long as we're not free, we cannot have dignity. We want to have our dignity. We had to have our dignity. We got to be free. So as a result of this movement, on the 25th of April, 1974, these free officers movement were able to carry out a change in regime. They call it a revolution. They changed the regime. They overthrew the fascist regime of Portugal and replaced it with a transitional government. This transitional government, many of them already knew the PAIGC. So one of the first things they did was call to meet with the PAIGC. Now you might ask why. How come they didn't call to meet with Frelimo in Mozambique, which was a Portuguese colony? How come they didn't call the MPLA in Angola?
In Angola, yeah.
It's because Guinea-Bissau now already had a state.
Okay.
On the 23rd of September 1973, 9 months after the assassination of Amilcar Cabral, the orientations that he gave came to be realized. These deputies were going to go down to the southern part of the country to meet, but the Portuguese found out about it and began to attack that area. So they secretly went to the eastern part of the country on the border with Guinea Conakry, a place called Medina Boy. And on the 23rd, they met and established the structures of the National People's Assembly. Who's going to be the head table, who'll be the president, the first, second vice president, the first, second secretary. And then they approved the proposed constitution on the 23rd. So they told everybody, come back tomorrow morning on the 24th September, early in the morning, and we're going to proclaim the existence of the state, the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. And they did. They came back on the morning of 24th of September and proclaimed the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Immediately after they proclaimed that, Guinea-Conakry, the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, recognized this Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Cuba, Soviet Union, Vietnam, North Korea, everybody. Within 24 hours, 79 countries recognized the unilateral independence of Guinea-Bissau. Now, this is important because in most parts of Africa and the world, if there's a liberation armed struggle going on, usually they will establish a provisional government outside of the country, and they will proclaim independence outside the country. That party, that movement proclaim it. But with us, it's the people. The People's Party organized the people into committees and then organized the people to have their voter registration drive, to elect the deputies. And a percentage of the deputies came from the party structures of the people, but the other percentages came from people who were popular people, 60%. So it was these people, the National People's Assembly, who organized their head table, and it was the president of the head table who proclaimed independence. He said, according to the National People's Assembly, we approved this resolution, and so now we unilaterally proclaimed the existence of the state, the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. 24/7.
So what you find, thanks, Comrade Imani. So what you find here is that it was the people who were developing the development of the new republic. It was the people who had made a decision. It was the people who had decided that now we want to have a republic in Guinea-Bissau. It didn't come the opposite direction, where in the case of my own country, the elites decided on the decision and the constitution of a structure in the state. So this one, it came from the bottom up.
Right, exactly. Because of the decision that was made, in the 1950s. The decision was that we would not organize just a vanguard party, an elite party.
Okay.
And we would not organize a popular party. With the popular party, you still have those who are at the top, in the center, make a decision and imposing those decisions upon the popular mass. We decided to organize a People's Pan-Africanist Mass Revolutionary Party, where those committees implanted throughout the villages and the neighborhoods and even the work sites, clandestinely, will be the ones who would have the conception, make decisions, and then apply those decisions in practice, and then impose those decisions in the structure of them.
No, that's beautiful. And viewers at home, we are with a known Pan-Africanist and a member of PAIGC. He is stationed, or he is located in his indigenous home of Guinea-Bissau. We are having Imani na Umoja. This is a pre-recorded conversation. So for you that you just came through, you must know that we've got a Pan-Africanist Toto, if one were to say, a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, if we were to clarify. Now, just Imani, one of the things that had taken place specifically historically in Guinea-Bissau just a few years ago, there was a popular movement and a popular the PAIGC was popular just in the previous elections before the imperialist COVID-19. So, at that moment, it seemed as if the PAIGC was on the verge of winning the election, and at some point we learned that somebody else had won the elections. Can you just take us through that moment, and also how is the society now? How is the government now, and what transpired exactly at that moment of the elections? Our viewers would probably want to know of these developments in Guinea-Bissau.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to point out to our viewers that the PIDC, when it was a party state, it held elections. We went to multipartyism. The transition lasts from 91 to 94. It was in 1991 that we changed the constitution from a party state to a multi-party state. And most of the resources, the material resources of the party now became the property of the state. It was the party's radio station, the party's printing press, some of everything the party had became now the property of the state. So we decided to go with the pressure because we had some awesome internal traders who were collaborating with imperialism. So we went to multipartyism. The first election took place in 1994. Everybody all of the enemies of the PIC was singing and dancing. The PIC is going to lose really bad. We wiped out. To the contrary, our people are not ungrateful. Our people voted for the PIC, and of the 100 deputies, we won 64. There were two positions that were disputed. We ended up losing those two, so we ended up having 62 out of 100. So we had control. We have is what is called a parliamentary system, or if you want, a semi-presidential system. It's not like South Africa. South Africa, you have a presidential regime. Most of Africa, you have presidential regimes. With the parliamentary regime, it's the parties that have power. So the parties, when they go to elections, legislative election, the party that wins the most seats, they can guarantee that they can have their program passed by the majority of the deputies in the National Assembly, as well as their budget, will be the party that has to be the government, whether the president likes it or not. So we won that one in 1994. But in 1998, there was a political military conflict before our term of office ended. So we had an armed struggle among ourselves, even in the city of Bissau. Where I'm at right now was like one of the front lines. The war ended in 1999, and the PIC lost both the legislative elections and the presidential elections. And that's the only election that we lost. Because by 2003, among those, that party that they won the elections. Huh? They didn't steal it. They won the presidential election, but they didn't win the legislative election. Legislative election was really split. PIC had 24. The party called PRS had 28. Another party had the movement about that. They had like about 23, something like that. So they put their 27 together, those 23 to get the majority to form the government. And so we didn't disturb their government. You know, we just pointed out the contradictions, but all of our members of parliament, the deputies, continue to participate. Of course, you know, we played the role of clarifying the contradictions, but we didn't do anything like a coup d'etat or anything like that. But among themselves, they did a coup d'etat. Among those in 2003. So 2004, we had legislative elections. The PIDC won the majority, the relative majority. Out of 100 seats, we got 45. But we formed the government without any other party. And the people were happy. But unfortunately, in 2005, the man who did the coup d'etat in 1980 named Nino Vieira, the man who lost the war in 1998-99, he came back on a helicopter. The helicopter that came from Lassana Conte, the general, the one who did the coup d'etat in Guinea Conakry against the PDG, the party secretary. So Lassana Conte, with some of his generals, brought Nino back into Guinea-Bissau against the will of the government of the day led by the PIDC. And there was collusion with some of the traitors among the military leadership. So they ripped off the election and began to bring drugs into our country, going to Europe, making a lot of money from that to try to consolidate themselves economically. But they had contradictions among themselves. So by 2008, when we had the next legislative election, the PIC won the overwhelming qualitative majority. We got 67 out of 100. Yeah. And the following year, 2009, because of the conflicts among them, they killed themselves. And in killing themselves, they killed Nino, who was the imposed president. As well as they also killed the army chief of staff of the day, Tagman White. So we had to have early presidential elections. And our candidate won the overwhelming majority, Malam Bakasanya. So now we have, well, as the people in the village said, we had the three stones that you put the cooking pot on. We had the legislative majority, we had our government, and we had the presidency. So we said, okay, now it's time to take off. Time to make up for the lost time. For all the damage that's happened from the war, the damage that happened during the coup d'etat. Organize the party stronger, organize the people, making sure the people embrace their party with political education, with work, and make sure that the base structures are strong and that we tighten up our relationships with our allies. But unfortunately, the enemy never stops working. So by 2012, before our term ended again, they did a coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat. And this one has overwhelmingly clear evidence that the leadership of ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, which is similar to SADC, South African Development Council, the regional body. Unfortunately, though, ECOWAS is much more reactionary than SADC. SADC, with ECOWAS, as well as with the African Union, with this corrupt leadership, with this remote control, with this masters to the control of them from Europe and from the US, they didn't want to see what was going on in Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau, we were moving toward becoming a self-sufficient country. Our country is super rich, like all most countries in Africa, if not all the countries in Africa. But geographically, strategically speaking, in the southern part of our country, in a place called Buba, we have one of the biggest, deepest natural ports in Africa. It's capable of having 4 super large ships anchored at the same time. Each one of these ships can carry 240,000 square tons of merchandise, which means that if you have the proper equipment to unload it very quickly and load it very quickly, then it'll become one of the most popular ports of all of West Africa. What does that mean? That means that the economies of Dakar, Senegal, of Conakry, Kamsa, Guinea, Conakry, of Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, and even Lagos, Nigeria, and even Porto Novo of Benin, it would be transformed. Because you have a lot of inland countries, like Mali doesn't have any access to the sea at all, or Burkina Faso, Niger, all these countries, they don't have access to the sea. So what they do now is they get most of the overwhelming majority of their goods come from Dakar or come from Abidjan. And the ports of Dakar and Abidjan are controlled by French imperialists. So once we made this, we made an agreement with the Angola government. Just as a footnote for those who are watching, the MPLA, Movimento Popular para Libertação Angola, the People's Popular Liberation Movement in Angola, was co-founded by Amilcar Cabral and his comrades. And we coordinated the armed struggle together through what was called the CONCP, the Conference of Nations Organization of Portuguese Colonies, a Pan-African structure, the first in Africa to coordinate armed struggle across state lines. So additionally, in order for the MPLA to be able to proclaim independence, because as some of you might know, there was a serious struggle. You had UNITA, which was controlled by the apartheid regime in South Africa.
South Africa, yeah.
As well as the capitalists of the United States of America. You also had FLN, the Holden Roberto, which was strongly supported by the neo-colonial regime of Zaire, Mobutu Sese Seko.
Mobutu Seko.
Right. He even had troops that were fighting against the MPLA in Angola. So once going back to what I said about the PAIGC, helping the Portuguese to overthrow the fascist regime, and I mentioned that the new regime wanted to meet with the PAIGC. Well, that's because we already had our state, unilateral state. Whereas in Angola, Mozambique, you didn't have it. So they had to have a meeting later on between the new regime of Portugal with all 3 of these big factions inside of Angola, the MPLA, UNITA, and FLN, to try to come to a consensus, which they never reached. So they end up shooting each other, trying to see who can get to Luanda, the capital of Angola, first to proclaim the independence of Angola on the 11th of November, 1975. But we knew it was anticipated that the racist regime of apartheid in South Africa would come with their fighter jets, their super
And
big tanks
ammunition.
called the Elephant,
Yeah.
and even maybe some of the nuclear missiles that they have. So we have some comrades who are still alive today, who have been trained in the USSR how to use a ground to earth to sky missile called the Strela. It's a big weapon that you're on the ground. You can shoot a fighter jet.
Yeah.
And so we had begun to shoot down fighter jets here in Guinea-Bissau, the Portuguese fighter jets. So we sent these comrades also to go to Angola to protect Angola against the invasion of the racist regime of apartheid so that Impele could proclaim its independence. So leadership of Impele up to now will never be ungrateful with the PAIGC. So we decided to sign a mutually 50-50 win-win cooperation agreement where we said that since Angola had since now that the leader stopped its fighting after Jonas Savimbi was killed in 2002, and now you have a lot of money coming into Angola daily. Just from the petroleum, you have more than $200 million coming in daily from selling petroleum. But they also have natural gas, they have diamonds, they have gold, they have a lot of fisheries, a lot of factories. So we signed an agreement where they will help us to develop this port in southern Guinea-Bissau. So we can now build a railroad track from southern Guinea-Bissau to the western part of Guinea-Conakry, through the eastern part of Senegal up to Mali. And that way, when Mali wants to get its merchandise, they can get it from Guinea-Bissau instead of from Dakar. Also, we have a lot of bauxite reserves in eastern Guinea-Bissau. So with the agreement we have with Angola, we still have, even though it's been sabotaged, it's been delayed by a number of other coups d'états, that we would explore the resource, the bauxite in eastern Guinea-Bissau, bring it back on the railroad to Cuba, where we have this deep water port, and ship the bauxite to Angola, where we'll undergo its refinery process. So the neocolonialists in West Africa said never. Additionally, we also had some of the leadership of the armed forces and defense and security out of Angola come here to help us do some reforms with our defense and security apparatus. But again, now the neocolonialists of West Africa said never. So they did a coup on the 12th of April, 2012. So we had to struggle against that coup. Many people, some were killed, some were injured. But finally, we won, and we had the elections again in 2014, and we won those two. We won the presidential election, we won the legislative election with 57 out of 102. So to make a long story short, every time we take a few steps forward, the reactionaries try to push us back.
And the problem. Thanks again for this on behalf of the viewers and for those that are watching this episode, because it provides a great historical detail of what currently is transpiring. It is based on the historical interactions or the historical experiences of the PAI and the PAIGC with the imperialist and reactionary forces. So whatever that you see and whatever that you understand that is taking place in that particular country, you need to understand the historical development of the political party or the revolutionary party that has been in the helm. And because of the interest of the history of the Guinea-Bissau, and one day, Imani, you must invite me to come so that I can come and drink in that wisdom of Amilcar Cabral in your indigenous home. I would love to do that.
You're invited right now. It's your home.
Thank you. Now, Imani, you spoke about the ECOWAS, and this brings us a good transition. You talk about these regional bodies, ECOWAS, SADC, and the others, and you are talking about the hand of the ECOWAS in some of the coup d'états in your country. And I want us to talk a little bit about the African Union, which has been seen as the body that governs the African states. What is your view about the African Union? Because it does control these regions, SADC in the case of the Southern Africa, ECOWAS in the case of the eastern aspect where you are located. So, what is your view, and how would you help a young person who engages in Pan-Africanism ideology, or who wants to understand the politics of the continent in relation to the African Union? What is your view about it?
Yeah, very quickly, we must understand that the African Union is really the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, somewhat transformed. That Kwame Nkrumah was one of the main architects of the foundation of the OAU in 1963. Ended up criticizing it, as you said in your introductory remarks, because he understood that the structures that exist were just for heads of states and ministers of foreign affairs. But we need to have a mass party to liberate Africa, to unify Africa, and to have socialism. But it became somewhat of a limited victory in the sense you had a continental organization, but at the same time it was mainly controlled by the neocolonialist puppets. So that every time a puppet head of state would go to a meeting, before they go to the meeting, they have to go by the embassy of the country that colonized them. So there were attempts to try to transform it. Sekou Touré was in the leadership of one of those attempts in 1982, 83, up until when he was killed in 1984, to try to put mass structures in OAU. Didn't work. So then you had the other initiatives represented by Muammar Gaddafi, where they want to have a real African parliament, have an African monetary fund, African bank. So instead of us having to go to IMF, to the World Bank, where they just rip us out, we have our own money. But unfortunately, we haven't been successful in this. So unfortunately, the OAU is really like a neo-colonial body, mainly controlled by the Western imperialists. It gets the overwhelming majority of its funds from the European Union, and the European Union pretty much is also a structure that doesn't have power. The Central Bank of Europe has more power over them, but then you have the imperialists in the United States that have more power over them. So most of Europe has pretty much particularly Western Europe, but even a large part of Eastern Europe has become pretty much like satellite vassal states of the U.S. So as a result, you cannot expect the African Union to take the decisions that will represent the interests of the masses of our people in Africa at all. And as you said, they used the United Nations delegates its authority to the African Union to deal with questions of Africa. But the African Union will delegate its authority, that it doesn't have much of, to the sub-regional bodies like SADC or like the ECOWAS in West Africa. And so what they do is collectively, they come together to try to destroy parties like the PAIGC. So as we're talking right now, the person who is the rotational president of the African Union, is Thabo Mbeki, who was a neo-colonialist president of Senegal, who was a puppet of French imperialism, and you can also say, well, imperialism, because there's no really no such thing as French, British, or U.S. It's imperialism. They don't know boundaries. And the current president, rotational president of the Assembly of Heads of States of the ECOWAS, the West African Union, is the same neo-colonial puppet that has snatched the presidency in Guinea-Bissau, Umaru Sissoco Embalo.
And how does this influence the politics, therefore, the types of politics of the continent? Not only from the parties like the PAIGC, who are standing for the revolutionary outlook of Pan-Africanism, but how does this affect the general type of politics? Like we have seen also the situation in Burkina Faso just a few days ago of a coup d'etat. How are these puppets, as you put it, influence the type of politics that we have in the continent?
It means that you cannot rely on the state apparatus at all. That the state apparatus right now, which is in the hands of the neo-colonial puppets, is always on the side of the imperialists. So when you have a situation like you said, Burkina Faso, we always have Mali, Guinea-Conakry, Niger, etc. And you also have a mass movement going on in West Africa that is anti-French imperialist. So the state apparatus here, led by the neo-colonial puppet, the one who did the coup d'etat, because he didn't win the elections. He didn't. It was the PAIGC presidential candidate won the elections. It was clear. He got 48% in the first vote, whereas this other one only got, I think it was like 38%, something like that. But then they, through their different maneuvers of fraud at every level, at the voter assemblies, at the structure of the National Electoral Council, even the Supreme Court of the day said that they had to recount the votes. They never did. And the president of the Supreme Court ended up running out of the country. And then finally they put soldiers around the Supreme Court building, as well as all the national ministries building, as well as the National People's Assembly. And they imposed this person on us at a hotel. According to our Constitution, it's supposed to be the National People's Assembly that gives inauguration to the president. That didn't happen. They didn't even. They took some of the deputies to the hotel, but it wasn't even 50%. So it was illegal. It was a coup. Still, it's a coup. But it's a coup, as I said now, that was sponsored by ECOWAS in cahoots with the African Union, and even a faction of the UN. So what happens is we have situations like what's going on in Africa. Just to give you an example, the PAIGC is anti-French imperialists. Anti. The mass of our people are anti-French imperialists. Inside of Senegal, you have a large segment of the population that's anti-French imperialists as well. They have their movements going on. Same thing in Burkina Faso. So when you have a situation like in Mali, where the regime that's in power, the military kicks out the French imperialists, we're happy. We're on the side of them. The masses of people in Mali, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Bissau, all over, are on the side of the people of Mali in their struggle against the French imperialists. But not this one. This one now, he licks the boots of the French imperialists. So that when Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, when he wants to come to get to Africa, he can't go to Mali because the French have been kicked out. He can't go to Senegal because the mass of people are taking over the streets with the anti-French sentiment. They had a number of uprisings last year as well as this year, and some of the main targets were the French establishments. So he can't go there. So what happens? This puppet invites him to come to Guinea-Bissau. He doesn't even stay for a day, but comes in to late at night, at least out early next morning, but enough time for them to march down the streets in their cars, their armed cars, to take some pictures and show that he's welcome in Guinea-Bissau. So we're on different sides of the equation. When it comes to a situation like NATO expansion in the world, particularly in the eastern part of Europe, where they're trying to surround Russia and trying to isolate China, we're on the side of Russia. We're on the side of the People's Republic of China. That's where we're at. But not this one. When Macky Sall, the acting president of the African Union, who is the big brother or the main puppeteer who pulls the strings for this puppeteer, he was asked to call for a meeting among the heads of states of Africa to meet with Zelensky, the puppet of the United States inside of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Out of the 55 countries in Africa, of course, one is still colonized, West Sahara, but of the 54 that are not in classic colonialism to have a head of state, of the 54, only 3 showed up. Macky Sall from Senegal, also acting president of the African Union, the president of the RDC, and the president of Cote d'Ivoire. Now they say the president of Libya, but who's the president of Libya? Libya's flu. So they showed up. So this one he didn't show up, but the next week he called Zelensky on the telephone. Said, "Yeah, I'm coming to Kiev to meet with you, and I'm gonna come with Macky Sall." Blah, blah. Of course, now Macky Sall sent out a disclaimer the very next day. So that's he's on the side of Palestine. We're with the Palestinians. He's with the Zionists of Israel. He even brought back tear gas from Israel.
I remember. Yeah.
Even my eyes have not been spared from that. My nose from that. They even shot us up with tear gas inside of the PAIGC national headquarters. Can you imagine it? So what happens is the lines are clear. He's against us here in Guinea-Bissau. They've made decisions to fire a number of health workers, doctors, nurses, lab technicians, as well as not pay the salaries of a lot of the teachers. And then at the same time say now they will put a cap. They're not going to allow any of the new teachers come in to be hired. No, exactly. And so as a result now, we just talked about this morning, people are dying in the health centers because they don't have the health personnel there. So what he's doing every time he travels with 25 million safer. 25 million safer is about I have to translate it later. It's a lot of money. Every time he's out of the country, more than inside the country. And then you got
so basically he's preparing his life outside of the country because he knows that he's not the popular representative of the masses of the people.
That's where he was before he was imposed upon us. And when he came here, when he came back, he became the prime minister. I told you, in our system, the party that wins the most positions, the one supposed to have the prime minister. The PAIGC won the most. But he gave money to the president was elected. He was a traitor. Zaymario Vash, Joe Mafia. He was elected. He took money from this terrorist to make him the prime minister. And he had a private jet. You know, since the history game started, not even the president of the country has a private jet. He had a private jet sitting at the airport all the time. And he's been accused of drug trafficking. Huh? He's also been accused, even by the French authorities, of being involved in terrorism. So he's going all the time without anybody checking the plane. What was he taking? And he stayed in a hotel instead of staying in the house. He stayed in a hotel, all while he was so-called illegal prime minister. So then
what I'm picking up from the conversation as you are describing these type of politicians, especially in your country and the others, at the beginning of this conversation, when I asked you about him, and when did you start getting involved as an activist in this type of politics? You spoke about the moral standing, the cultural, the political, and all aspects. And what I'm picking up and I'm hearing is that the type of politics and the type of politicians that are taking a leading role in the African continent, they lack this moral compass, this moral element, because the majority of them, they're either traitors, they are either greedy, they are either handled by the imperialists. And this for me, therefore, leads me to the next, which is probably the second last question, the impact of the gradualist Pan-Africanist orientation. What would you say about that? Because when I spoke to you earlier, when I started speaking to you, you spoke about a revolutionary Pan-Africanism, and I spoke about the gradualist Pan-Africanism. What is the impact of the gradualist approach in the morality of the politicians that we have in our society? Because the majority of the revolutionaries are dead.
Well, first of all, I want to say that the overwhelming majority of our people have strong morals. And we should not be confused by these few imposed puppets. They don't have morale. They don't have a heart. They only have the form of a human being, but they're not real human beings. They don't have humanism. They've been imposed upon us. No question about that. So that should not be confused with the morality represented by the masses of our people. In terms of revolutionary Pan-Africanism, we have to have revolutionary Pan-Africanists to bring it about, to make it a materiality. And these revolutionary Pan-Africanists are not supermen, superwomen, no. We're human beings who have flesh and blood, and we make our transitions into another form of life. As I say, we pass on, which means that we have to make sure that we have solid Pan-African organization. And that's what we're lacking right now. We don't have that. We have a lot of Pan-African formations, a lot of them, but they're not coordinated. Our enemy coordinates the struggle. One of the big struggles in the world right now is NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's the coordination of military apparatuses of various countries. It started off with the Western European capitalist countries, with Canada, the United States of America. But now it has absorbed most of the states of Europe, East and West, as well as even parts of Asia, and has a lot of allies in other parts. So they're coordinated. And then you have AFRICOM, the American Command in Africa. As well as you got the American commands in every other continent too, Asia, Latin America, Europe, etc. They're coordinated. They coordinate economics. It's us who lack coordination. So to bring about revolutionary Pan-Africanism, we have to make sure that all of those of us who are watching, we don't just give speeches or write commentaries or participate in these type of online programs. We have to make sure that we're active on a daily basis with our brothers and sisters at the schools where we're at, the work sites, neighborhoods where we live, to make sure that we have this side, and then now bring these organizations together to coordinate our struggle together. So with these, what you call the gradualists, those neocolonial puppets that are in state power, we must come to realize their strengths and their weaknesses. One of their biggest weaknesses is when they see the masses saying one thing, they're forced to say, even if they disagree with it. They just say, even if you ask Ramaphosa in South Africa, his position on, yes, I agree with it, even though he's not working for it. You ask him for his position on Palestine versus the Zionists. No, I'm against the Zionists. But then you see him now giving contributors to an Israeli ambassador. But when you have the people putting the pressure on, they're forced to say. Then eventually now, you bring together, for example, in the Zionist South Africa, you got a number of groups there. You got the Pan-Africanist Congress, you got the ZAPO, you got this new one, the Revolutionary Workers League, the Revolutionary Socialist Workers Party. You got you got a number of them. We need to have a front, in my opinion. And this front must also work together with the South Africanist Communist Party, COSATU, NUMSA, the workers' unions there. And he must coordinate also with the revolutionary side of Zimbabwe, with the ZANU, the workers' unions there, with MPLA, the workers' unions there, with us here in Guinea, in West Africa. Because unfortunately, I think a lot of our people in Guinea-Bissau still don't know a lot about the day-to-day reality in the Zane of South Africa or Zimbabwe or Angola, whereas those in Zimbabwe, Angola, Zane of South Africa don't know much about the day-to-day life here in Guinea-Bissau. When I met you in Ghana in 2018, there were a number of representatives from parties that were there. And when I introduced myself as PAIGC, some of those delegates said, PAIGC? I thought the PAIGC died. Oh, I thought the PAIGC. No, we don't know each other.
I remember.
Okay. So that is to say that we know we can't depend on these neo-colonial puppets, but we know they're there. We know that it's the masses of us coming together that have to make the transformation we need to totally liberate Africa, so that the modes of production are in the hands of African people. It's deciding what we're going to grow, what we're going to dig up, what we're going to do with it. We're going to make sure that we qualify our productive forces, so that those of us who are agriculturists or agronomists or steel workers, that we're more qualified to produce more efficiently, to unload the ships more efficiently, to load up the ships more efficiently, and then make sure that with our humanist consciousness,
yes,
high level, that those products that we produce are distributed just on a just basis. And then all these riches that we have in Africa will belong to African people and will be among the richest people in the world. So in a nutshell, we don't spend a lot of time. We try to follow what these public. We don't waste a lot of time thinking about it. Most of our energy has to be more proactive, doing like what you're doing right now. We have to raise the conscious level of our brothers and sisters throughout the continent as well as throughout the world. And then at the same time, not work isolatedly. Work with all of our other allies that are working against imperialism in Latin America, in Asia, throughout the world, in the islands, everywhere. We must do that.
So because the most important thing is coordination, because even the reactionaries in your language was those that are using the state apparatus, the African Union and other regional bodies, they are organized. And I think that is the most important question. And we must never run away from the critique that there are many formations that are Pan-Africanist, but they are lacking a coordination and they are lacking the solidity of it all. Imani, give us your final words and what you want to say to the viewers, those who will be watching. Specifically, the majority of the people that are watching this program are in South Africa, Zania, but we are expanding and we are hoping that even in Guinea-Bissau, we will be having a number of viewers subscribing to our YouTube channel. Give us your final words.
Okay, before the final words, I want you to know that as we're talking right now, you have an armed contingency of ECOWAS, mainly Senegalese and Nigerian soldiers here, armed. who are patrolling our streets, trying to protect this illegal, anti-constitutional, self-proclaimed
Government.
president they on us. Yeah, so they coordinated. I'm sure they're like an extension of the imperialist army. They just gave them the guns. Okay, you go do it. And our last words for now. I hope they won't be our last words. Our last
no,
words
they
for
won't.
now. Our last words for today's program is first of all to thank you for this initiative, and we give you encouragement to continue. And we cannot understate the necessity of organization. It's not just that, it'd be a good idea for you to be in an organization. Like, for example, you said, it'd be a good idea to go for a walk, or a good idea to, it's necessary. And when something's necessary, if you don't do it, you die. If you don't eat, I'm sorry, you won't live more than a few months. You don't, you die. You don't drink water for a few months, you're gonna die. If we don't organize, we're gonna die. Fortunately, we have those who came before us, who gave us a lot of experience, a lot of examples and models of organization. Of the different types of organizations that we've been able to study, from the coalitions to the fronts, to the popular parties, to the vanguard parties, the elite parties, the mass revolutionary parties, we come to the conclusion that the mass revolutionary party is the most democratic, the most effective, and the most permanent, because it involves the mass of our people, which means that we have to be patient with the mass of our people. Those who clean streets, those who paint, those who are bricklayers, those who put glasses, those who are plumbers, those who are doctors, those who are lab technicians, those who are teachers, those who are unemployed. We have to work together. And we have to work together in the sense of what is for the best of most of us. Because right now, the enemies of humanity are really desperate. They've sucked up a lot of resources in the world, and now they're being challenged by those who get more power. So it's gone from what was temporarily for about maybe 20, 30 years, what they call a monopolar war, to a multipolar war. It's not just one group of imperialists that are calling the shots throughout the world. Now there are other forces that have strength who are challenging them. And we're on the side of those who have the strength, because their strength is based upon ethics and morals. So to be on the right side of history, brothers and sisters, comrades, let us help make history by continuing our culture. As Cabral said, the liberation movement is our culture organized politically. So if you look for the politically organized manifestation of our people's culture, on a larger extent, it's the Pan-African revolutionary mass party that we need. So either you be a part of this as a part of the solution, or unfortunately, you be on the wrong side of history as a part of the problem. Like we say all the time, if a burglar breaks in your house, begins to attack your mother, and you hold on to the pillow, act like you're asleep, you're against your mother, because you didn't help defend you. Mother Africa is under attack. Let's defend her proactively. And that way, when our great-great-grandchildren, when they look back at their great-grandmother, great-grandfather, they'll be proud. Our great-grandmother and grandfather were part of the solution. I'm proud to have their name.
I'm proud to have that, to carry that in my blood. Imani, thank you very much for joining us this after. It was a beautiful conversation, and I think that I've learned a lot, and I think also the viewers have learned a lot. Thank you very much, my comrade. Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it to even those that are sitting there at home listening to this conversation, and we appreciate your wisdom and your continuous involvement in revolutionary Pan-Africanism. And thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you. Ready for the revolution.
Yes, sir.
Viva Pan-Africanism.
Colleagues and friends, viewers at home, thank you very much for watching with us. We were having Comrade Imani Umoja straight from Guinea-Bissau, and he was giving us those bars relating to this particular topic, and he talks about various issues, including the history of Guinea-Bissau. This is a pre-recorded session and episode. We hope that you have enjoyed it. Thanks you very, very much for participating. Remember to subscribe to our channel. We want as many as possible as we can have. See you soon. Bye.